What's going on, everyone? It's your boy Savvy and welcome back to the Savvy Show. And in today's episode, I have an SCP where literally when it came out, I already knew it was going to be a juicy one. However, I just literally forgot to react to it. And a few of you guys on my most recent video was reminding me about this SCP, how this is potentially a juicy one. So you already know your boy's diving deep today to see what this is all about, guys. This is SCP-5999. This is where I die. The last SCP. So, yo. I feel like that first part, the last SCP is capped because, you know, SCPs are coming out the woodworks every day. But we shall see what they mean by, saying that. And this is where I die. Let's see what this SCP is all about. So with that being said, if you guys are excited for this reaction, please remember to smash that like button, smash the sub button, and hit that bell so you can stay plugged for each and every upload. And like always, there's nothing left to be said, guys. Let's get this show started. Alrighty, SCP-5999. This is where I die. The last SCP. Lego.
Some things are best kept contained. After all, this is the founding principle behind the SCP Foundation themselves. To secure and contain the most dangerous anomalies in order to protect human lives. But within the Foundation itself are things which should never be uncovered. Secrets that must never be told. Secured behind multiple layers of containment like the 7 Seals of Revelation, is a threat so high level in its nature that it can't even be given a class. SCP-5999. But in order to truly understand this late series SCP, we have to go all the way back to one of the earliest. Anyone looking for SCP-001 will quickly realize that there are several different entities and anomalies that share this designation.
Yeah.
Many reasons have been given for this classification quirk. Perhaps they were all discovered in the early days of the Foundation, before the current numbering system was introduced. Others have suggested that many different SCP-001s are an intentional misdirection by the Foundation to keep the nature of the true first SCP a closely guarded secret. One of the many entities, and the one we'll be referring to as SCP-001 to understand SCP-5999, is otherwise known as the database.
Really?
Information about the database is kept a secret to the entire SCP Foundation, apart from the Overseer Council. The reason behind this? Well, that would be because this SCP-001 contains details of the very nature of the Foundation itself, including its creation. Not how the organization was founded, mind you. How it was created, and by whom. We're about to break the most powerful layer of containment of all, the fourth wall. You see, to you or I, the SCP Foundation and its vast catalog of user-generated articles on the creative and the creepy are nothing more than a source of entertainment. It can be fun to study the lore and the nuances of different SCPs, appreciating the imagination and hard work that the authors put into writing them. It can even inspire us, fuel our own written endeavors, whether that takes the form of fan fiction, independent stories, original SCPs, or even a YouTube series. But when all is said and done, we all know that the SCP Foundation is fictional, and they know it too. Pieced together from various fragments of information within their own archives, the database contains everything the Foundation knows about the real-world authors of the SCP Wiki. Just like we told you, it's time to weigh a fond farewell to the fourth wall, the metaphorical barrier that separates what we know to be real from what we know to be purely fiction. The fact that they exist in this fictional capacity is something the Overseer Council hopes to hide from the rest of the Foundation's personnel. But they also have plans in mind for the SCP Wiki writers responsible for creating them and expanding the roster of anomalies they keep contained. The SCP Wiki entry on SCP-001, the database, closes with a proposal, a plan from the O5 Council to reach the Wiki's authors in the real world, through mimetic kill agents that will put them to sleep and then kill them. With that important background context in mind, now let's go all the way back to the other end of the SCP Wiki.
If they do that, they're basically killing their own gods. They're the ones creating them. So, I mean, wouldn't that erase you guys if you killed the, the creators of you? Who knows?
And take a look at SCP-5999.
Let's go.
When first accessing the file, you, the reader, will notice a few format differences between this entry and others within the SCP archive. Each section of SCP-5999 is hidden behind an encryption, and accessing these will reveal the different levels of this entry. Remember how we mentioned the 7 seals of Revelation at the start of this video? That wasn't a coincidence. In the Bible's book of Revelation, there are 7 symbolic seals securing a book that John of Patmos saw in his vision of the apocalypse. When these 7 seals are broken and the book is opened,
Who's that,
this
dude?
symbolizes the second coming of the Messiah and marks the beginning of the biblical apocalypse. In much the same vein, SCP-5999 is sealed in 7 different parts, each behind its own encryption,
What the
culminating
heck?
in one apocalyptic ending. So at this point you're probably thinking, what actually is SCP-5999?
Yeah.
What could be so dangerous that it has to stay hidden in multiple segments? Well, on the surface, SCP-5999 is just a story. It details one of the SCP Foundation's many investigations into an anomalous object. Nothing too strange about that. But there's something more to it, since with the Foundation there always is. And it has something to do with the images at the header of each section of the entity. At the top of each part of SCP-5999 is a picture of a group of candles, 7 to be exact. But the further down you read, one by one the candles start to go out, until you reach the end of SCP-5999. Delving into the first of these sections, the SCP-5999 entry describes a corpse that seems to be cursed with multiple anomalous properties. After the assault and murder of one Miss Jacqueline Hallcroft, her remains were scattered. According to this entry, any person coming into contact with a part of Miss Hallcroft's deceased body, or anyone who learns about what caused her death, will experience anomalous effects.
What?
These manifest in various ways. For example, subjects may hallucinate that they see a disheveled woman with wounds similar to Miss Holcroft's before her dismemberment. This sight is sometimes accompanied by sounds of whispering, and even begging that calls the subject seeing and hearing things by their name. Others have reported hearing an unknown song set to the tune of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. The anomalous influence of Miss Holcroft's dismembered remains is known to continue until a subject's death.
This seems so random. Like, straight up. Extremely random.
With many reporting seeing the woman's deceased body lurking in their old photos, or suffering sleep paralysis
What?
as they feel something being forcibly removed from their guts.
This is definitely
Some
mimetic
subjects
effects.
even report discovering body parts and organs, anything from fingers to eyes to teeth to hair.
Okay, so it's either they're imagining all this stuff, or it's actually body parts. I'm assuming it's just a mimetic effect. They're not really actually seeing. I mean, they're seeing it, but it's not really there. It's all in their head. I feel like that's the case, because if it's anything else, like, that's pretty wonky.
And finding it at random places, such as when opening a drawer or in their food. Finally, a number of subjects affected by the remains of Miss Holcroft have reported a specific irrational fear. The fear that the chains are weakening. Even after the
candles?
Foundation recovered Jacqueline Holcroft's bones and her remains were buried in a proper funeral, the effects that her dead body parts had over living subjects did not stop.
I'm assuming when they say chains, I mean by, the candles representing the segments where this SCP is residing. So we shall see if it actually breaks in this animation.
Reported their children went missing, and the attendees at Miss Holcroft's funeral were somehow spontaneously disemboweled after the ceremony. To keep these effects to a minimum, the Foundation apparently has a containment procedure in place. The SCP-5999 entry details something called Procedure Sevenfold, wherein the SCP Foundation gathers 7 civilians and brings them to a location called Albright Manor. On October 30th, these 7 people are sedated and awake on the night of October 31st. All entrances to Albright Manor are sealed, trapping the civilians inside. Observed via a network of surveillance devices throughout the manor, Procedure Sevenfold always results in the deaths of the 7 civilian witnesses brought in by the Foundation. Whether they are told to perform a ritual or are offered as a sacrifice is unclear. The following morning, Foundation cleanup crews will remove the remains of these people, disposing of their bodies with an incinerator. For the rest of the year, until Procedure Sevenfold needs to be conducted again, Foundation personnel on site at Albright Manor are instructed to be careful around any surfaces that contain the phrase, "This is where I died."
So this is from the sacrifices that have died in this manner. It's not particularly the SCP. It's the people that are being used to contain such an SCP. Wow.
By now, you are most likely wondering what the remains of Miss Holcroft and Procedure Sevenfold have to do with anything we've talked about
Yeah,
so far.
please.
What is the connection to SCP-001, the database? Is there something linking an anomalous corpse with the Foundation's knowledge of its own fictional existence? What does a fear of the chain's weakening mean? And why do none of these questions seem to acknowledge what those 7 candles represent, or why they're still gradually going out?
I'm assuming that's the chain, and which with each flame getting blown out or snuffed out, whatever you want to say, that's it getting weakened, you know? But I could be wrong.
Scrolling further through SCP-5999 doesn't seem to yield many more answers, though. In fact, the more of the sections you look into, the less it seems to be about Miss Holcroft, or even make any link to the database. And the deeper you go, the fewer candles remain lit. The next few portions of the SCP-5999 entry are dedicated to completely different investigations that have little to nothing to do with Procedure Sevenfold. Miss Holcroft's corpse and the anomalous effects it creates are also absent in later segments of this entry in the SCP archive. So if the cursed body parts of Jacqueline Holcroft are not SCP-5999, then what is? One report details the fates of a mobile task force trapped in a fog-shrouded town. Here they encounter a lamb that appears to be undead, and evolves into an ungodly winged beast before the MTF team's very eyes.
What?
Another that follows is a transcript of an exorcism. During a classified Foundation operation, one Agent Grace was possessed by a demonic entity and sent to the Department of Demonology. Specialist in demonic psychology Dr. Peter McNeil attempted to remove the demon inhabiting Agent Grace. However, after trying to intimidate the demonic entity with various passages from biblical texts, it appears as though maybe the demon was able to spread its influence to both Agent Grace and Dr. McNeil. Of course, neither of these reports seem to answer any of the pressing questions or explain the exact nature of SCP-5999. As you go further into the entry, you can't help but notice how often chains are referenced. In fact, that seems to be the only thing constant in all these disjointed segments. Mentions of a failure of the chains to hold what lies beneath, and chains that have become too few in number to hold it, all create the sense that something once was locked up, sealed securely away, is managing to break free. Then finally, as the last candle goes out, you are literally brought face to face with the horror of SCP-5999.
Okay, let's see.
And its true nature is revealed to you. A decaying, desiccated corpse stares out of the screen at you. Its eyes are sunken deep into its skull, lips shriveled almost completely away, exposing rows of rotten teeth. Could it be Miss Holcroft's body? You aren't sure. What you are sure of is the corpse's face is getting closer to the screen, and now it's smiling at you. You can feel your heart pounding, beating against your ribcage. As the world around you begins to fade, and your life slips away from you, the last thing you see is the grim face of the corpse staring out at you with its dead, sunken eyes. The truth of SCP-5999 is that it has been specifically designed to kill whoever reads it. By whom, you may be asking? By the SCP Foundation themselves. Cast your mind back to the database, and remember that the Overseer Council are aware of their own fictional existence. They know that they aren't real, and plan to use a memetic kill agent to take out the SCP Wiki authors that created them. SCP-5999 is that kill agent, an entity created by fiction to kill those living in reality. SCP-5999 works by drawing a person in, offering disjointed and disconnected horror stories as a means of grabbing a reader's attention. Further and further down through the entry, that person will go, searching for the meaning behind these chilling tales, and therein lies the trap. Each layer, each section of SCP-5999 that you read, is another candle extinguished, and with every flame that goes out, a seal is broken. A chain becomes unbound,
that was a chain,
allowing the entity contained within the archive entry itself to get closer. Its sole purpose is to fulfill the proposal laid out by the O5 Council, after learning that they were fictional, along with the entire SCP universe. By pulling you in with the mystery and intrigue of the confusing, convoluted stories, SCP-5999 is able to deploy, jumping out of the screen towards you, condemning you to a dark and grisly fate. Or maybe that's just what the O5 Council and the SCP Foundation wants us
That actually kind of makes...
Either way, it might just be safer to get your SCP knowledge here at SCP Explained.
For real.
And speaking of, go check out SCP-1730.
Bro, okay, that was kind of cool. That was kind of cool. It was really confusing up until the end when they explained that all these stories are just to capture us as readers. It has nothing to do with this SCP. And knowing what this SCP is about, it actually makes sense. So, wow. The SCP Foundation is trying to kill us now, the authors. And the viewers. Like, bro, this is wild. But with that being said, man, if you guys enjoyed this reaction, please remember to smash that like button. Also, smash the sub button and hit that bell so you can stay plugged for each and every upload. And unfortunately, that concludes today's episode. However, I'll catch you guys on the next one.